Okay, another function that I find handy when I'm trying to cut data and manipulate data is using the offset function. And there's all kinds of uses for it. I'll show you one that I've used more than once. And it's I've kind of, it's a contrived example, but you'll see hopefully see the benefits. What the offset does, it looks for a particular cell as an anchor cell, and then it will offset so many rows and columns that you can control, and it returns a value from that. So if you're always looking for, from an anchor cell, 3 columns over and 2 columns, or 3 columns over and 2 rows down, and you reference that 3 and 2, it will always reference that cell that's relative to your anchor cell. And again, I wind up using this a lot when I'm trying to manipulate and cut data. And here's one example. So let's say that here's a data set where I've got an index and I've got some type of automobile type. And all I want to do is grab these and put right there. And that's easy enough. I could certainly grab these, right click, copy, come up here, right click, paste special, and transpose. And I get those numbers. So there's the Ford, the Chevy, Dodge. So that's one way to do it. The problem is if this ever changes, well, this is static. And so you would have to redo it again. So that works if you're doing a one-time thing, but if you want these to be dynamic, so when these change, then what we just did is not sufficient. But I could use as an offset. So I'm going to zoom in and look at this. Now I've already contrived this where I've got an index here and then I've got that same index here. And in these are just numbers where I put in a 1, a 2, and then I left click and I went over, so I had that. So that's important that you have these. Now I want to write a formula here using the offset where I get this value. So offset, and the very first argument is, what is my reference? Well, since I'm always going to be returning something from this column, this particular data set, my anchor is always going to be that. And I'm going to put dollar signs around it. I'm going to emphasize that is my anchor. That's where I'm always referencing from. You don't have to have these dollar signs to absolute reference, but this is for this example, I'm doing it. Now what I wanted to do is I want to return how many rows below this one. Well, I don't want to return any. I want it to return this one. So what I'm going to do, but when I copy it to the right, I want it to return 1 row down. So what I'm going to do is actually reference this counter at the top. So in this case, I want to return 1 row below, but I don't want 1 row below. I want 0 rows below. So I'm going to subtract that from 1, or subtract 1 from that. So in this case, it's going to return 0 rows below this. The next argument is how many columns. Well, I'm only referencing 1 column, and so I don't want it to jump any columns. The last argument is if you wanted to return a range of cells. So if you were summing or maxing or minimizing, then these next arguments are pretty cool, but we don't need that in this case. And I'm going to do that. Okay, so now I'm going to copy this to the right. So this is good. This C2 is okay. I probably ought to put a dollar sign in front of my row reference, but I don't think I have to in this case. So there's that Ford. So if this would change to Dodge, that would change. And if I just copy this to the right, so there's the Dodge, the Chevy, and the last one is Ford. So if I would change the last one to a Mercedes, you can see that changes. And so that was the way the offset, I use that in this case. And again, there's the anchor. Then you reference so many rows references, and if it's a negative number, it goes up. And then columns, and if it's a positive number, it references to the right of the anchor. If the columns is negative, then it references to the left. Okay, so that was one use of the offset thing.